Good afternoon. Welcome to NorCal PTAC's webinar. You've landed a construction contract. Now what? This webinar is put on in partnership with the Port of San Francisco, and we'll be discussing the essentials of project management for construction contracts. So this is a really relevant topic for anybody who's in public works, and we certainly have the right gentleman who's going to be leading the show today, Ed Duarte. He is our construction and public works specialist with NorCal PTAC. Talk about what PTAC is in a minute. And he's a great expert in this field, and we're lucky to have him today. My name is James Forrest. I am a procurement specialist, a contract specialist with NorCal PTAC. And our resource partner today is Tiffany Tatum, the Senior Community Development Specialist with the Port of San Francisco. Hi, Tiffany. So we're really glad with their partnership. We've been putting on a good number of webinars with them as well. And so we'll hear in just a second from Tiffany about what sort of projects they've got going on and how to do business with them. In the meantime, I'm just going to explain a little bit about NorCal PTAC and what we are. We are a nonprofit program. We're not actually a government agency. We're a part of a whole network of nonprofit programs that are funded across the United States. So I think there's about 96 or 97 of us. There's PTACs in every state in the country, but we're all kind of independently operated. We're under the same funding structure from the Defense Logistics Agency, as well as local sources like California State, for instance, for us. And we get funding from the governor's office. And basically, our whole purpose for existence is to help businesses navigate procurement processes, which can be quite complicated. So we really focus on finding underserved businesses, disadvantaged businesses, minority-owned businesses, small businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses. You get the idea. So we have a team of procurement specialists, a small team, mostly working remotely, and we've got decades of experience in the contracting world. And we offer this to you at no additional cost. So we like to say you've already paid for our services through your taxes. And when you think about what government contracting it is, it's private entities getting their tax dollars back, because public works construction, for instance, if it's a government agency that's putting out a RFP, it's being funded with your tax dollars. So you want to get in the competition and get on a contract as a subcontractor, as a prime contractor, and make some of that money back that we're all putting into the system. So that's really the idea, is try to get those dollars back in your pockets. And we specialize on helping small businesses. So in 2021, our services helped our clients win more than $500 million just in these 15 counties alone. And so if you are interested in getting on board with PTAC, you just have to sign up on our website. You need an established business, so not a pre-venture, an established business. It has a primary location in our service area. So you see these 15 counties on the map here. That is our service area. So I know some folks are from out of the area always when we have these webinars, and that's great. We love to see you here for the trainings. Anyone can join, and you'll get a lot out of it, not just for these counties or even just for California. But if you'd like to become a client of ours, please note that we will refer you to someone else if you apply from out of the area. So we'd love to see your application if you have one of these counties. All 9 counties of the Bay Area, up the coast to Oregon, and then inland counties of Siskiyou, Trinity, and Shasta. We can help you out. And then once you're in our system as a client, what that means is you get access to one-on-one counseling with one of our procurement specialists, which is really them sitting down with you on a video call, exchanging emails. They're basically going to be your coach through government contracting. We don't do the work for you, but what we can do is share all of our knowledge and wisdom and guidance on how to navigate procurement processes. And so that could be anything from getting registered in SAM, doing market research, how to get your WOSB certification, or as you're going to hear today, how to navigate the complexities of a public works contract. So really just about anything related to government contracting. There's several topics that are kind of related, like financing and, for instance, loans and things like that, and business plans that we don't help with. So it has to be directly related to government contracting, and we can assist with it. We can also set you up with a custom bid matching profile. This system is really neat. Basically what it does is you work with your procurement specialist to work out some keywords that describe what your business sells. So whether it's a service or a good, we put that in a system, and then you do some tinkering with it based on the results you get. But ideally, the goal is that you'll wake up every day with an email in your inbox. If there's any matches, and the email will have a list of RFPs, RFQs, sources sought, opportunities that should match what your business does. So you click on it, it's nice and hyperlinked, brings you to an opportunity, and then you can decide if you want to bid on it. So that's a tool that we pay for and that we offer to our clients for free. We find that folks really enjoy having that service. It will collect state as well as local and federal bids. And the last thing, this is not just restricted to our clients, but for really anybody, and you know this because you've joined today, we have a ton of free webinars that we're always putting on, and these are available for everyone to join from anywhere. And if you miss one, you can find them on our website, norcalptech.org. Under the resources tab, you click past webinars, and that's you're going to find our archive of all the past webinars we've done the last 5 years that we've hosted. So that's where this one's going to go. We're going to have the slides as well as the video recording on our website under the resources and past webinars tab. So those will all be available along with Ed's handouts today as well. Okay. And we're getting Tiffany saying a good idea to take advantage of the bid match as well, which is absolutely. So if you're not in a service area, you can find your own local PTAC, aptac-us. .org/find-a-PTAC. These will be hyperlinked when you get the slides, and you can follow that. I also honestly find that if I just Google any county, just about any county, and maybe the state if you're out of California, and just the word PTAC, P-T-A-C, you'll come up with the correct resource, and then you can give them a call. All right, speaking of Tiffany, let's hand things over to Tiffany Tatum a little bit. Tiffany, as I mentioned, is the Senior Community Development Specialist with the Port of San Francisco. And Tiffany's going to talk a little bit about some of the projects here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to be in this space with you all. I see some familiar names in the chat from San Francisco. So hey to my San Francisco fan, and nice to meet all of you that I haven't had the chance of meeting before. I don't want to talk long. But I just wanted to say we're excited to have this partnership with NorCal PTAC. They've really been a great partner. Ed is, I mean, the knowledge that he holds is sort of overly impressive. And so I learned so much. I'm not technical in contracting, but I learned so much from the workshops that he hosts, and I'm able to share that with the businesses that I support. And so these are just a couple of our upcoming opportunities, and I think there'll be a few more on some slides at the end. Our as needed engineering professional service contract did already go out. It went out last month. And so even though it's, far past May, but I'm excited. I hope you guys are ready to take your notes and really dig in and work to apply all of the things that Ed is going to share with us today. I'm going to hand it back over to James.
Okay, all right, great. And Tiffany's already done a great introduction to Ed, so I'll just transition right over to Ed Duarte, who's our excellent construction public works specialist, and as Tiffany mentioned, a true expert in the field. So pay close attention here. And thanks, Ed, for putting all the research into putting this together today.
Thank you both, James and Tiffany. I appreciate the nice comments. I decided to put this workshop on because over the last year and a half, I've done many webinars, as I think some of you have attended, about the estimating and bidding, which of course is the key to landing a contract. However, we put so much emphasis on that we sometimes forget that we are having successes. We do have DBEs and MBEs and WBEs that are landing contracts, and there aren't a lot of workshops or resources out there training for what happens when you land the contract. Well, if you think putting together an estimate is tricky, The good news is that you have the contract. The bad news is that here comes more red tape, more regulations, more formalities. But we learn how to handle that. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. You've landed a contract. What happens next? So I want to work, it's an overview of a typical public work agency and owner's contractual requirements and procedures. We're going to talk about preparing for the pre-construction conference. I'm not talking about the pre-bid conference. This is, the bid has been awarded. Now we have what they call a pre-construction meeting. What you have to do for contract administrative setup, understanding mobilization procedures, and overall just establishing some good PM practices. Now, what you're going to see on the following slides are references, methodologies, documents that illustrate the communication process that we go through in a public works agency. As you've heard me say in the past on public works, fortunately, the heavy civil industry and the large commercial building industry, we follow the guidelines of engineers and architects, and it's pretty much the same. So it's only natural that over the last 100 years, the project management process has evolved into a pretty standard routine. What I'm going to be showing you, what I'm going to be discussing and illustrating are typical documents that you absolutely will encounter during the life of the project. So falling back on my other often said remark, I have to go in two directions because there are some of you who are prime contractors, but normally when we talk about DBEs and these types of programs, the majority of our attendees are subcontractors. So as a prime contractor, everything I'm going to talk about applies to you. As a subcontractor, 99% of what I'm going to talk about applies to you. You just have to keep that perspective in mind, pending whether you are a prime contractor or a subcontractor. Our pre-construction operations check, it should look something like this. You know, again, read those specs again on the general conditions, review all admin requirements, set up the organization to handle it, review the proposed schedule. As a prime, you will prepare the first go around for the schedule. As a sub, you follow along and hopefully are able to provide input, but the general contractor will control the schedule. The owner's input on the schedule is limited to a start date and a completion date. A lot of owners, they try to overreach. The smart ones don't because of the issue of means and methods. It's up to the contractor to determine the best way to build that project, as long as it's built per plans and specs and it's completed within the contract allotted time. So as I said, the GC will do a preliminary schedule, and the CM and or the architect or the engineer will review it, or the owner's rep, and you know, pretty much sign off on it. They will have some input, but for general purposes, the prime has the final say-so on the structure of the schedule. Everyone needs a mobilization checklist. As a prime, you've got a whole bunch of things to check to set up. As a subcontractor, you have a lesser amount of items, but you have a checklist too. The writing and issue of subcontracts, of course, that applies just to the prime contractor. And the next bullet point, reading, understanding, and signing subcontracts, comes back to you subcontractors. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you understand and read the subcontract that the prime is sending you. In today's world and in California Public Works, as many of you have heard me say, it's a tough environment. The typical subcontract for any, pick a general contractor, Cahill, DevCon, DeSilva Gates, Bay Cities Graded and Paving, Granite Construction, any contractor that you go to their website and take a look at their sample subcontract. They average 30 to 35 pages in length, every one of them. And there's a reason for that. So I'm not going to go into that in any detail. I can't because we don't have enough time. But those contracts are written to protect the prime, to protect the owner. And if you read them and the scope of work that you agree to as a sub is correct, it protects you because of the flow down clause, which we'll talk about. You'll be writing initial purchase orders and you'll be writing purchase agreements. There is a difference. And then of course, the main flow of communication always revolves around submittals. What are submittals? We're going to talk about that. Submittals and shop drawings. And as a prime, we have a saying in the industry, those of us who operate as a prime, once we're awarded the contract, then we go back and we complete buying out the job. And so I'll ask my estimator or I'll ask my project manager, have we finished buying out the job? Well, what does that mean? Well, you can take 10 estimates, 10 different projects, and they were awarded to 10 different general contractors. And I can bet you money that eight out of the 10 will have gaps, or they'll have an allowance in there for money to cover a certain bid item, but they don't have a firm quote, either from a sub or a supplier. So when we say complete the buying out of the job, I'm talking to you primes, you need to go in and finish up and fill in the holes and gaps where you don't have firm pricing. Because when you start work, you hopefully have got everything nailed down and there's not going to be any surprises down line. It's a worthy goal and it's achieved about 95% of the time. So the first simple rule for the job site is simply know the plans and specs for your scope of work. And when I say that, don't take that lightly. I mean, if your superintendent, your foreman, your person in charge at the project, they need to know those plans and specs for their scope of work backwards and forward. There's nothing that will undermine your credibility and your profitability faster than to have somebody in the field representing your company, prime or sub, that isn't sure what they're supposed to be doing because they haven't done their homework and sat down and studied the plans and specs. I've seen it over and over and over again. So when I say know the plans and specs, that's exactly what I mean. As a prime, you're going to monitor job progress to stay on schedule. As a sub, you're going to be monitoring your own portion of the schedule. You have to have proper staffing of the job, and you have to have efficient control of staff, subs, and suppliers. So as I said before, there's a checklist of procedures. You start setting up your crew sizing and field supervision. And when it comes to the project management, here's the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about. All of these bullet points occur as part of the contract administration. A schedule, submittals and approvals, substitutions, safety programs, project meetings, RFIs, requests for information, owner's representatives role and inspection, payment applications, change orders, And I should have put on there also contract closeout. These are the major points that I'm going to illustrate, that I'm going to talk about, and that you will be involved in if you are performing on a public works contract. Now, let me stop here and for a moment and say, for some of you larger subs, and if any of you are primes, you might be thinking, this old man, he's talking about all this, but this is all handled by software. That's true. And the software has been evolving. And the software is out there. And most primes are now using one out of maybe up to 3 or 4 different project management software packages that are available on the market. All of them will cover everything I'm talking about. All of them will have forms and examples of what to fill out. So yes, I understand that. But what I'm going to be showing you is the precursor to the software, just strictly for the purpose of illustrating what these documents are, what their purpose is, and how you can handle them yourself if you're a small company and can't afford the software. Finally, on a public works contract, if it's a job of any size, say 5 or 10 or $15 million, it's probably 100% probability that the prime is using project management software. In fact, it may be mandated and could be administered by the owner. When that is the case, you subcontractors merely have to jump on board, log in, and they will have a place for you to handle RFIs, to handle your submittals, the submission of your submittals, safety programs, et cetera. All of that will be covered in the software and you'll be able to control. But the point I'm trying to make is not everybody can afford those programs. And if you're a subcontractor, don't worry about it. Be more concerned about what it is you're going to be filling out and what it is you're going to be responding to and what these documents actually mean. So I wanted to clear that up because the examples you're going to see are, for lack of a better term, we built them from scratch on Microsoft Word and Excel. They are all now passé, if you will, because we ourselves are using project management software. But the PM software, it's not my job here to be a salesman for a particular software package. I want to show you what these documents mean and how they are to be utilized. A schedule is developed to expedite the project flow, include a start and end date, a level of labor and other resources required. There's plenty of software for scheduling. Most public works agencies require a CPM, critical path method. Some will accept a bar graph, but that's going to be on a very, very simple, short project. Most of them prefer CPM. And the two standards, the heavy hitters out there are Microsoft Project for jobs up to about 20 million and Primavera P6 for jobs bigger than 20 million. It depends on the owner's preference because the method, the software that they want the prime to use in their project will be defined in the specifications. So the techniques that we're involved with is as a prime, I'm managing the project budget, resources and materials, my subs, my suppliers, inspectors, dealing with the architect, dealing with the engineer or construction manager, reviewing estimated costs versus actual costs is something that everyone has to do. Prime and all the primes do it. That's what our accounting software does. But many subcontractors don't have sophisticated software to track what they're spending on something. All they know is that, well, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to pour 1,000 feet of curb and gutter, and I start on week 1, and 3 weeks later I'm done. And here's all the costs I spent, and I divide that by 1,000 feet, and that's what it cost me per foot. Well, that's a heck of a way to do business, because that's like waiting until the end of the year to see if there's any money left in the checking account. And if there is, you say, well, I guess we made money. And if there isn't, well, I guess we lost money. Can't do that in public works, folks. You won't survive. So bookkeeping and cost tracking is a big deal. You're going to be reviewing and verifying invoices, your daily reporting. There's a daily report form I'm going to talk about. And you say how to track and complete the contract project paperwork, which I'm going to show you. And again, coordinating all the activities. I'm going to skip over job costing to some degree because it's an accounting function, but just be aware, here's some guidelines to help you set up either with your software, or you can do it on an Excel spreadsheet. But it's as soon as you start doing a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year, $100,000 or $200,000 on a single contract, you really need accounting software, because it's what keeps you on track towards profitability. It compares the estimated cost with actual costs. It gives you early warning against problems in job performance, changing costs of labor and materials, and the basic components. If there's a unit cost, dollars per square foot, activity costing, excavation of earthwork, followed by backfill. Those are 2 activities. Phase costing, that's self-explanatory. How much did it cost us to do phase 1 or phase 2? Departmental costing and total company costing. They all matter. And if you're not doing that, I urge that you start doing that. Job site meetings, they're going to be dictated in the specifications. The prime's going to be doing it. And the bigger subcontractors should be having the same thing. It's how they conduct business on a week-to-week basis. Sometimes, depending on the size and complexity of the job, the meetings could be once a week, once every other week, twice a month, etc. As a prime, you develop the agenda. Possibly a CM might be doing that, but primes and subs both are going to be providing input to the agenda. So some of the types of meetings, there's the initial pre-con meeting, sub meetings as needed, weekly planning meetings with the superintendent and crew, that's for the prime, and safety meetings as required by law or regulation. And nowadays, safety meetings are even dictated in the specifications as well. QA/QC, well, it's 2 parts to it. There's code compliance and doing it as defined in the specifications per plans and specs. We want a level 5 finish on the drywall. But the quality of your work that your people put out is a reflection of your company, because that's all people are going to remember. So you ought to have your own written policy about quality control. It's a team effort. And if you don't practice it, it will catch up with you. Change orders, there will be change orders, there will be claims, there will be disputes. Unfortunately, in California, we live and die by litigation. The big boys know that, and they've got the infrastructure in the office to handle that. Smaller companies, and especially the small subs, not so much. They know just enough to say, I'm not going to do that unless I get a signed change order. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but every public works contract we've ever done, and it's probably been over 2,500 of them, and I don't know, maybe I think we're approaching 3,000. prime contracts. Every one that I've ever recall, the change order process, when there is a dispute that the inspector or the A&E or the CM says, you have to do this, I can't say I'm not going to do it, because as soon as I say that, I'm in breach of contract. And I'm opening myself up for termination. In public works, it's an unfortunate reality, but we as contractors are required to proceed with disputed work and then submit a claim for arbitration, litigation, or mediation. That's the reality. So for you newer primes, if you have a subcontractor tell you, you've got this issue come up at the job site, and it boils down to this work has to be done, and the CM or the A&E had said it has to be done. The sub says, I'm not going to do it until I get a signed change order. Your hammer is your contract. They have to do it. I know it's a crappy way to do business, but it is how it operates in the public sector. You have to submit a claim. And that claim, the resolution of that claim can take forever, but that's life. I don't know what else I can tell you. People pay big money for seminars on change orders. I could do 4 hours on change orders. We don't have 4 hours. We have another hour and 15 minutes left. I'm just going to go over the broad brush basics of change orders. You need to know how to recognize the change and their effect on your progress of your work. You need to know the various types of claims. You need to have some procedures in place for avoiding disputes and preventing maintenance to keep things rolling on an even keel. The typical change order process, the nice one, the one that we all would like to have, is the customer owner requests information regarding the change to the scope and submits an RFI for information. They say, or they'll send you an RFP, request for a proposal, or an RFC, request for a Q, for request for a quote. They all have different acronyms. Contractor takes it, evaluates the change for impact on schedule, the budget, and workflow. For the subcontractors that are going to be involved in this change, he sends them a copy of the directive. And then based on the contractor's information, the subcontractor collects all of that information from the subs and from their own forces, work up a change in accordance with the markup procedures that are shown in the specifications. And the markups are always defined. Then you submit that price. If you're not trying to gouge the owner and you do have every single legitimate cost in that change order, hopefully the CM or whoever it is that's the owner's rep is going to review it, will agree to it. Quite typically what will happen is they say, well, I didn't really think it would cost that much. And my answer has always been the same for 50 years. Well, I'm sure you didn't think it would cost that much, but you're not in the business of pricing labor, equipment, and materials 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And I am. And I'm telling you, here's my backup. And you always have to provide backup. And once you show them that your charges are legitimate and you are not trying to gouge anybody, and your markup is within the approval limit as stated in the specifications, then hopefully they'll say, fine, we got a deal, shake hands, sign it, and move on. That's the best scenario. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. So now I'm going to come back to that, what happens in when there's a dispute. So for change orders, there's identifying the types of contractor claims and changes to the scope of work. Who's responsible for authorizing changes? It doesn't happen so much anymore, at least not in our company's business. But I can remember when, on a couple of instances over the years, where an inspector got a little puffed up on their authority limits and told the contractor to do this work. And the example I'm thinking of it is putting epoxy coating on the floor of a warehouse and into the storage area. And the plans and specs clearly showed that storage area did not get epoxy coating. So the inspector told the painting foreman, you got to do that. And the painting foreman argued about it and said, no, it's not on the plans. I don't care. It needs to be done. Do it. So the guy did it. Turned in a request for a change order, and they had a very, what can I say, stingy owner that said, was that in the plans and specs? No. Then why did you do it? Well, because the inspector told me. Well, he's not authorized to make any change orders, so the claim is denied. And on constructability, contractuality, that was absolutely legal. So the painter painted that floor for free because he followed the orders of someone not authorized to make changes. The authorization should be clearly defined in the pre-con meeting. The effect of changes on schedule and performance are many, and depending on the impact and the number of changes, it can get pretty complicated. I read in the Daily Pacific Builder when the transit center in downtown San Francisco was finished, the contractors, that was I think $3 or $4 billion project. They filed a claim for $350 million. How's that for a claim? $350 million. And their backup, they showed there were 14,000 RFIs. You tell me when there's that many RFIs, you're talking about a set of plans and specs that are not complete. I don't care what you're telling me. So there's methods of negotiating, implementing, and posturing for minimal impact. Change order processing, proper submission of the claim in the change order, claims avoidance measures, proper steps to document changes to the work. All of these bullet points are features and components that you need to be familiar with, and you're going to get that from the specifications. The contract is the specifications, and it tells you what has to be done, what can't be done, and how it's to be done. So that's why I say knowing your plans and specs and knowing your work, you really can't be working out on these types of projects if you don't have the experience. As I said, the QA/QC is usually set up by the owner's architect engineer. Safety, OSHA requirements are a big deal. The legal obligation to inform starts with your accident report. There's an OSHA form to fill out, and then of course your daily field report. You should be noting any accidents that occur. You have to understand how. Oops, sorry about that. OSHA inspections, the types of citations, whether it's serious, willful, repeated, or failure to abate. The Cal OSHA handbook details all of those things with great specificity, in great detail. And of course, state plans, anything else that the state might require. We're very highly regulated here in California on public works. And those of you who are doing it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When it comes to the project closeout, You need there will be a specification on that. You need to review those closeout requirements. If you don't understand the importance of rapid closeout, I question why you're in contracting, because the longer you let that job dangle out there unfinished, the longer they're going to hold up your retention or more, and it can get out of hand very quickly. We establish checkoff lists to do that stuff. And some of the items that you will run into, there'll be a spec section that defines the punch list procedure, what they want to see in as-built drawings. In the old days, we used to have a big sheet of paper and a red ink pen, and we would draw in the changes by hand. Well, that's for the dinosaurs now. Everything wants to be on CAD. So again, going back to your estimate, you need to have a cost item in your estimate to pay for as-built drawings, both for the people who prepare it, those who provide the input, and then the delivering of the CAD drawings to the owner, along with the O&M manuals, the warranties, the building permit checkoffs, going through the final inspection, following to see when the notice of completion is filed, and either filing a stop notice if you're haven't been paid, or clearing the stop notices if you are a prime contractor. Successful project management will obviously help you make more money, but it grows the company, and maintaining relationships is an important part of that. If you're a sub, you should develop a good relationship with several general contractors that you can do work for, that they know your productivity, they know your quality, they know your reliability. I think if I had to point to one thing that most of us look for in subcontractors, and that's the fact, can we count on them? Are they going to be there? Are they going to get the work done? Do they do good work? Do we fight with them on do they nickel and dime us on everything? All of those issues either generate a good relationship or deteriorate a relationship. So it's vice versa, up and down, general to sub, sub to general. As a prime, we need to maintain a relationship with owners, engineers, architects, and inspectors, conduct follow-up with our customers, and maintaining awareness of our competitors, which is kind of like a minor comment, but you need to know what your competition is doing. You need to have a general idea, because if you go to the bid list on all the school jobs in the Bay Area, you're going to see essentially, depending on whether it's North Bay or South Bay or East Bay, you're going to see the same list of primes. Same thing with the water treatment plants. Same thing with the transit work. We all have our niche, and we tend to gravitate towards that type of work. So pretty soon we get to know who we beat out for the last job. And one of the ways that we do it, we subscribe to Daily Pacific Builder, and we track the awards, and we see who got that last job that we bid. And if it was awarded, we know what the price was, because the bid results are posted on the internet and posted in the Daily Pacific Builder. As such, we have what I call a general contractor's pipeline to know who's doing what, and are they doing well? Are they hiring? Are they firing? You'd be amazed at what one contractor can tell you about another contractor. Go back. Now, I'm going to share a screen, and I talked about all the points that I wanted to illustrate about project management. But to the share screen. I assume you can see that.
Yep, we got that.
All right.
I'm a little worried that we won't be able to get back to the PowerPoint because it's only sharing the app, but we'll get there. Cross that bridge when we get there.
I have a series of handouts that illustrate the points that I've been talking about. And get this right size. I'm just going to go through them one after another to show you what these documents look like, because that's really an explanation of what I just did an outline on. This first contractual working relationships is something for your reading. You're all going to get a copy of this so you can see that later. And it goes over a lot of the things that I've already talked about. Here's a typical pre-construction checklist. It's the one that we use for our company. This is what our PM and our PE and our superintendents, some of the items that might. Obviously, this pre-construction checklist can be expanded. This one was set up on an Excel spreadsheet, but there is so much to monitor and handle and flow. That's why I say that's the software that now provides all this stuff. It sets that up for you, and it's an interactive database that's all interrelated to you populate one set of information of data into a particular spreadsheet, and it goes to the appropriate other spreadsheets, and you don't have to fill it out twice. So, but this is what I'm just using these as examples of the things that you should be doing. Purchase agreement. What am I talking about? Well, I learned this from a larger contractor. We used to write a simple purchase order, and a 2-page carbon copy one. And they said, well, if you don't write a purchase agreement, that supplier is not bound by your plans and specifications. They're only bound to the make and model number of what they've quoted you a price on. And over the years, the contractors learned, and their attorneys had developed what we call a purchase agreement. It essentially is a 2-page subcontract, and it simply ties a supplier down to the plans and specifications, especially regarding the furnish all necessary shop drawings, submittals, O&M manuals per plans and specifications. Price includes all applicable taxes and freight delivery to the job site. So this is a typical project agreement, with the key phrase being vendor agrees to be bound to contractor to the same extent that contractor is bound to the owner. It's called a flow down clause. It's only 2 pages long. When do you use it? Everybody has a different threshold. Our threshold is $10,000. If we're buying something that's 10 grand or more, we send a purchase agreement, because that piece of equipment that they've quoted on us, they supposedly read the plans and specifications and saw in the equipment list that that's what that fuel station is supposed to have, a certain make and model number, productivity, output, etc. Whether it's a generator or a compressor or any kind of piece of equipment. Don't use a little 2-page carbon copy PO for something that's really expensive. That's the watchword here. Submittals. You hear that all the time. I remember I had a client in Oakland that landed a job over at Hunters Point, and he was a concrete. Obviously, he had done nothing but private work. And he called me up. He said, Ed, I got this contractor to do all this concrete work, and they want a submittal. What the hell's a submittal? And I thought to myself, wow, not a good deal. Anyway, I went on to explain what it was. In his case, they wanted to see a mix design for the concrete, the ready mix. This paper defines what constitutes a submittal. And there can be any one of these 10 things. Procedure, it can be a procedure. For example, what's a procedure? A demolition plan. How are you going to knock down the building? That is, you have to give them a written plan. That's your submittal for the demo plan. A critical path schedule, a CPM, well, we all know what that is. A schedule of values. That's architect engineer talk for cost breakdown. Shop drawings. When I was a young man, and I saw my first set of shop drawings, and I looked at them from the steel supplier, and I said, these are the red iron drawings. Why are you drawing all these up? And he says, because the engineer wants to look at them. I said, but that's what's shown on the drawings. And they said, no, they want to see that we read the drawings and that we are actually fabricating this I-beams to match the I-beam spec that he, and size, shape, and length that he specified. I said, okay, well, now I was a young man, and I didn't realize the importance of that. Product data. It'll come to me in a minute, but the sheets that you have to provide, like on paint, the makeup of paint, samples and mock-ups, manufacturer's instructions, manufacturer certificates, as-built, O&M manuals. All of those, every one of them is defined here. So for those of you who have some young folks or people new to the business and they want to know what a submittal is, this is a good little primer that will keep them abreast of how the industry operates. Because nothing works faster to set a negative tone from the owner as to having a project manager who appears to not have this submittal process under control. So when you send a submittal, if you're the prime, you're going to be sending in submittals for yourself and all your subs. So we have to track it. Again, in the new software that's out there, they have this log sheet already set up. This gives you an idea of how far back, 1996. Well, we had to do it by ourselves, and we had to develop these all on Excel. But you know what? We got a thorough grounding in what makes a good log sheet for submittals. This is our early version. The second version that we developed, we took input from Corps of Engineers and East Bay Mud and developed a little more complicated spreadsheet. For you subcontractors, you're only going to have maybe 2 or 3 submittals, maybe 4 at the most, depending on the complexity of your subcontract scope of work and the size of your contract. But it helps to have this. The important features being, when is it needed? When did it come? When does it go from the sub to the prime? When did it go from the prime to the architect? When was it returned? And what was the turnaround time? Well, for the fencing, it took 22 days for them to return that submittal. Pardon me. Obviously, the fencing comes at the end of the job, so it was not on the critical path. But if that happened to a submittal, excuse me, that for a scope of work that's happening in the middle of the job, that can be very, very time sensitive. This is the reason that smart primes sophisticated primes, people who know what they're doing, we all track the turnaround time, all of us. Because if there's a delay in the project, and the delay can be traced back to not getting an answer from the A&E, you can bet this log is going to be document number 1 in our backup for the claim. Here's a little CPM, a little simple one. Time-lapse diagram is one way to put it. The CPM, the master schedule that I just showed you, is the prime's responsibility, and updating it is a condition of getting paid every month. The reality is, and every experienced superintendent will tell you, that the master schedule, it governs you for overall progress, schedule progress. But the job is managed on look aheads. And the typical one is a 3-week look ahead. And that simply is where in the left-hand column, you put in the work tasks, the workforces that are going to be on site during the next 3 weeks. And you make up a little 3-week calendar from the 7th of November to December 2nd. And you block out the holidays and block out the weekend. And you see the 5 days, the 5 days, the 3 days, and the 5 days in white. And then you simply put an X showing who's working where. It gives the superintendent a very handy tool to know where everything is on a 3-week basis. And then you take that look ahead schedule and you compare it against your overall project schedule. You can see where you have to make adjustments, or where you have to get on the phone and get a subcontractor to speed things up, or have your people speed up, or whatever. But most jobs, even the experienced CMs and inspectors, they'll want to be looking at the 3-week look ahead schedule, because they're expecting that you're going to be finishing on time, barring any other unforeseen activities that might affect your progress. This is just a sample RFI. Again, we made up our own back in the old days. The RFI will be already printed out and set up in your software. And again, as subcontractors, the primes are going to send you the RFI that's in their software package, and all you have to do is fill in the blanks. But the purpose of an RFI, a request for information, is to ask a question that, as far as you can see, has not been answered in the plans or specifications. That is the purpose of an RFI. That's the sole purpose of an RFI. A little tip. It becomes very apparent to an experienced CM or a PM for owner's rep when they start getting a bunch of what we'll call frivolous RFIs, when the answer can be found in the specs or a note on the plans, one of two places. All right. So if you have a reputation on a project for turning in frivolous RFIs and you keep getting them back, my question is, what level finish do I provide in the drywall? And then the answer will be see spec section 9, paragraph 7. You are creating an image and perspective that you don't care about reading the plans and specs. You simply want the CM or the inspector or the RE You want them to answer everything, and that doesn't go over very well. So the moral of the story here is on RFIs, do your homework. And if you have an issue come up, a problem comes up in it, just make sure that you can't find the answer in the plans and specifications. I'll give you one more tip. If you've done your homework and you're absolutely positive there's no answer, and you send this in and you run into one of those rare individuals, and they're out there, who come back and say, refer to plans and specifications, you immediately fire back on, take the offensive. Absolutely. I did my homework. I've checked the spec section. I looked under finishes. It's not there. What you're referring to is not applicable for this application. In other words, you're telling the reviewer who's looking at your RFI, I know that my RFI is legitimate. You need to give me an answer. The reason that some people act that way is because they like to think that their plans and specifications are perfect. And much to their chagrin, they find out that they're human, and they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like we do. Here's an RFI log. Same thing. Date submitted, latest. Here's where you put in when you need an answer. Here's the date we got it back from the architect. Turned it around 7 days. 21 days here. 62 days on paving sections for concrete pavers. Well, again, it was not on the critical path at that particular point in time. This RFI log will be in the software that's out there now. And for you subcontractors, many of you will have half a dozen or so RFIs. Make up a little log sheet like this. If you're on a project where they're not providing the software for you, then you can do it yourself. It's not rocket science. What I'm trying to impress, point I'm trying to make here is the importance of tracking it and how it can affect your performance and affect your end result. And it's an easy way for tabulating everything. Why don't I stop there for a moment and let's see if we have any questions.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A here. Just a reminder, if anybody has any questions about Ed's presentation, please enter it in the Q&A tab, and he'll periodically stop, and we can just address any sort of questions or anything that might not be clear to you.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the Q&A and let me know, because we can always stop and go over something in more detail. Daily diaries and field messages went out today with the iPhones, smartphones, and tablets. You can talk into them and keep your diary. And again, in the old days, we used to print these all up. Typically, for the larger jobs, we would have a young person, maybe a recent graduate or a assistant superintendent or a project engineer that would be tracking this information. But it's important that all of this be recorded. Many owners ask the CM to track the people, and that's fine, but that information is not for your use, it's for their use. So you want to be able to either verify it or refute it by keeping your own daily diaries. And this is some of the information you need to be showing. As I've said on many times, when it comes to change orders or any kind of a dispute, the attorneys will all tell you, he or she that has the most paper wins. So when in doubt, put it in writing. Over the years, we tried many forms of a field report, and we finally settled on this. And it's something that our superintendents were able to handle and fill out very quickly. And it gives us all the information we need. One page. It's 1 page long. Okay, this is a cost breakdown. This is where, for a lump sum project, the A&E is going to, CM is going to want a cost breakdown, because this is an AIA form that it's going to govern how we get paid. And we get paid on what is called a percentage of completion method. If we're doing heavy civil work and the bid form had a whole bunch of bid items with unit prices and quantities, then that is your cost breakdown is already done for you. And you don't have to do anything other than put down how many feet of curb you poured today or this week or this month, excuse me, or how many yards of concrete you poured, or et cetera. On a typical architectural type job, like a commercial building, we have a lot more different trades involved. And you can see here, this was a fire, I think this was a fire station, where we have general conditions, we have mobilization, we have bonds and insurance, earthwork and paving, underground utilities, site concrete, aluminum windows, specialties, furnishings, equipment, mechanical, electrical. And all of these values have my profit and overhead built in, so that when you get down to the bottom, the total contract was $1,270,850. And then there's a separate sheet to put in change orders that could come after the fact. So that's a cost breakdown. This is your schedule of values. Okay. Now, here's an invoice, a billing period for a 30-day period. And we have a percentage complete. It generates that much dollars. And previous, we did 25. This 30 days, we did 15. We are now at 40% complete. So for this period, we incurred $32,250 of expense, and brings us up to $86,000 so far out of a $215,000 line item. So that same process is go for anything where we did work. It's going to show up in this column G, this period. This is right out of your AIA form. Again, the software has this. By the way, sidebar. Who determines this 15% complete, this 5% complete, this 100% complete? Who's the final say-so? The owner's rep. So from a contractor's perspective, it's important to remember that you can't just go arbitrarily, willy-nilly stating, I'm 20% done here, I'm 50% done here, I'm 100% done here, and fill out your pay app and send it in. Because if you do, you run the risk that the person reviewing it, who should have had the chance to review it before it was prepared, says, no, they're not done. They're not 20% done with the plumbing. There's nothing on site there. At the most, we can give them $10,000 for they delivered some pipe to the job. Point of story. All of us who've been around enough years, on the 25th of the month, it's an accepted industry practice that the PM or the CM or the chief inspector or the architect or whoever is representing the owner will walk the job site with the general contractor superintendent, and they'll have this cost breakdown on a pad. And they'll walk through and they'll go over every item, and the contractor, the superintendent, already has instructions from the home office what they are to ask for in terms of percentage. And they should have had input from the subcontractors. And then we walk the job together and say, I want 15% here, I want 100% here, I want 20% here, etc. If you don't do this in tandem with the owner's rep, you run the risk that the percentage you enter is not going to be approved. And you won't find that out till you get your check and you find out you've been shorted because they arbitrarily cut it down. So we always walk the job site ahead of time at the end of the month, usually the 25th, and have a, you want to call it a gentleman's agreement that these percentages are okay. And if you're a big sub and you've got a big month that you've put a lot of work in, I respectfully submit you should be in attendance, so that in case the inspector or the person with the decision says no, we don't think that percent is right, you can argue your case. Because if you don't do this as a subcontractor, here's what happens. You send me a bill for $75,000 for two items, 40% on one and 35% on the other. And those the percentage values of those equal 75 grand. It's a lot of money. A lot of money. You did a lot of work. But you weren't there. And when we walked the job site, this particular person said, no, we can't do that. We can't pay for completed items, for non-completed items, but we can give you materials on hand plus initial installation. Whatever their excuse is, they're going to say, we approve 40 and 20. So 60% of your contract has been approved for payment. However, you weren't there. You sent our office a bill for $75,000, and 30 days later, you get a check for $15,000 less. It screws up your books and especially your accounts receivable, and it causes friction. Moral of the story, if you have a big month and it's a lot of money, then you owe it to yourself to show up at the job site on the 25th and make sure that the inspector or the approving person authorizes the percentage that you are requesting. And of course, I don't have to tell you that everybody on every contract in public works in California, we have 5% retained as retention. So we made up a nice, simple little cover sheet that covers this cost breakdown, this pay application, percentage of complete, and we summarize it here with the dollars that were generated. And there's our previous, there's our current, there's our to date. And if the owner paid their last month's payment on all previous payments on time, then they don't owe us anything on previous payments. All they owe us is for this payment. And if you subtract the previous payment from the to date payment, then the two should balance and they match. It's a very clean, simple pay request. Software will do this for you again, but this is showing you how the concept works. Talked about change orders already. Extra work documentation. This is a big deal because this is the part where I mentioned earlier about doing work under protest. It really, it just messes everything up. It destroys relationships, credibility, antagonism. It becomes a us against them project, and those seldom work out well for anyone. And usually, as contractors, we take the brunt of it because we're the one that incurred the expenses. So extra work, i.e. change orders, can be done under different circumstances. Previously accepted quotation, the good example, easy one. There's unit prices, that kind of makes it simple. In the bid proposal form, they ask, we think there might be extra excavation, so give me a price per cubic yard for structure X. So the quantity is easily field measurable. So there's not going to be an argument there. Or they authorize T&M or a force account, which is T&M. So those A through D will kind of work themselves out. But it's this one that we don't. E, work under protest. We haven't even priced it out. We are already telling the owner, that's not under my scope. It's not covered under our contract. Oh, yes, it is. No, it's not. So they said, well, until we get this thing reviewed, we want it done. So when that happens, it puts in motion a chain of events and procedures that you as contractors need to follow. This goes the same for the prime or the subcontractor. And I can tell you from bitter experience, this can happen more often than we like to think, number one. And when it happens, if you don't follow this procedure, you're going to get the short end of the stick. So what happened? Well, what do you do? Well, if you write and distribute a field message to the owner inspector and indicate the work on reference drawing is proceeding, then give them an opportunity to tell you to stop. And you tell them that you're proceeding under protest. Push your project manager into getting this thing resolved one way or the other. And then simply document all labor, material, equipment, and time delays involved on a TM force account or protested extra work. Try to get the inspector of record to verify tags by obtaining a signature or a DEWR, daily extra work report. Well, what does that mean? That means this. We're going to go to the document itself. Well, let me back up. We'll finish what I was saying. These are more tips and suggested procedures that the PM and the superintendent must understand the limits of the scope of work. Obviously, you know your plans and specs. And here's some basic reasons for a change order. I already talked about authorization. Documentation. The establishment of a paper trail is, however distasteful, absolutely critical. Letters of notification, disclaimer, or request for additional compensation must be sent to the owner in a timely manner. That will be in the contract. If you don't notify an owner, a public works owner, within 10 days after beginning a disputed piece of work and telling them that you're going to file a claim, your claim can get denied on, again, a contractuality basis, simply by the fact you didn't follow the specifications on notification. Photos obviously are really important. Here's a suggested template for pricing out. Again, the software nowadays, they all have this covered. Here's an excerpt from change orders, specifications on change orders from a particular agency. It's very intense. It's very detailed. I mean, they cover everything. And contrary to popular belief, there's very few of us that are able to make a heck of a lot of money on change orders because the markups are always predetermined. They're in the specs. Rental rates, everything. You're allowed labor, 20% on labor, 15% on materials, and 15% on equipment. Well, but if that particular change order involves only my subs and not me, all I can do is put 5% on it. 5%. That won't even cover the cost of preparing the paper. By the way, this is a very typical markup specification. Very typical. There's more detail here than we need to try to discuss, but as I said, we could do 8 hours on a webinar just on change orders alone. These are some specifications that I thought would be interesting for you. Here's the typical change order request. Again, the owner might have their own. We did this for East Bay Mud and they liked it. I don't know if they're still using it. More instructions on but here's what I'm talking about, the daily extra work report. We took this right out of a Caltrans handbook. And it's just simply this. It's a daily timesheet that shows the workforce. And you know, you fill in the blanks up on top for the obvious project identification. That's no mystery. That's pretty cut and dry. Work performed by, okay, the Aztec workforce performed for East Bay Mud, description of the work, pouring an extra slab, whatever. Okay. So we put that, there's a place to put the equipment and the hours. The labor, the employee, the craft, start shift, end shift, regular time, overtime, premium time, nighttime. And the materials, and you have to have your invoices. So what have we done? We've simply put down on that particular day, this amount of labor and equipment effort was provided on this disputed work. So that at the end of the day, we don't put any price to this because all of the pricing will be done after the fact. It's the hours that matter. The payment, the wages are prevailing wages, so that's defined. The markup is defined. The equipment rental rates are defined. The material invoices are, there's paper copies for everyone to look at. So every day's work effort can be summarized in terms of dollars and cents. What matters is that it was noted on this particular date for, let's just say, an 8-hour shift and signed off by the RE or the owner's rep. In reality, you probably won't get them to sign that. We ran into that, so we added this note to our daily extra work report. We said, acknowledge for field verification of work effort only. Signature does not authorize approval for payment. Why do I want them to sign it? because I don't want to argue about this when we go to a claims hearing, that we were or weren't there, that we had 2 people instead of 3, etc. So if they sign it, they get a copy, I have a copy, and it's there for eternity. And the dollar amount will be, it's just plain old multiplication. That's not a big deal. What's the point of all this? We go out there and we do this disputed work, and we're out there for 5 days, and we have 5 of these sheets. And I don't care whether the owners have signed them or not. If he signed them, great. If he didn't sign them, we send him a copy anyway. Because when we get to the claims hearing, all that is going to be argued, all that I'm going to argue is the merit of the claim. Is that extra work or not? Let's look at the contract. Let's look at the drawings. Forget the cost. I don't want to talk about the cost. I want to talk about, am I owed this change order for this work effort? And if I've done my homework and the plans are deficient and we're legitimate, then I'm entitled to the award. The amount is not up for discussion or debate or chiseling. The cost is the cost is the cost. And we have 5 signed records, or you have 5 copies of the records, and the math, check your math. We went by your standards, prevailing wages, markup, etc. Here's all the invoices from the water truck, from the gravel, etc. You don't want to be debating cost on a change order. You want to be debating merit of the work effort. That's a very, very important strategy that a contractor has to employ. Otherwise, you're going to get killed every time you go file a claim, even if it's legitimate. People don't like change orders. Nobody does. Nobody likes a change order. So let's get the cost off the table. Let's just talk about, do you owe me the money or not? And if you could show me that somehow in the plans and specifications we missed it and we should have done this, then claim denied. And I'm not going to argue, because you showed me that you found my mistake. But if I'm right, don't be telling me that it should be $8,000 when the total of the 5 sheets is $10,000. Because it shouldn't cost. Well, nothing should cost this much. But welcome to California. So I could get a little vocal on this because claims are an ugly part of our business, but they are a part of our business. And it's going to happen because architects and engineers are human beings and they make mistakes on their drawings. And usually the mistakes are omissions. It's not that they do something wrong on purpose, they just left something out. And they used to like to depend on the phrase, try to legally depend on the phrase, well, the intent of the drawings was that I have a complete room. Yeah, but that's not what you showed on the drawings. Okay, so if it's not in the drawings, I'm not paying for it out of my pocket because I didn't bid for that extra work. It's not shown anywhere, so why would I bid it? Why would I price it out? All right, I know I spent a little more time on that, but it's an important part of your arsenal for documentation. And this form has been used for, God, I think every contractor has one. Caltrans is where I first saw it, and that's 50 years ago. It's easy to use. You bring it into the office and let your bookkeeper total up the charges. It's not rocket science. All that really matters is documenting the name of the person, of the workers, the craft, carpenter, labor, operator, and excuse me, and the hours they put in. That's all there is to it. Okay. Another log sheet. Again, the softwares, the different PM software programs will have them, but here's a change order log sheet. And it has a little different purpose in that the, move this thing out of my way. In that the, we entered the amount of the PCO. This is what we priced out at 21,000. We submitted it to East Bay Mud. The elapsed time was 13 days. The time it was returned on the 9th. They approved amount. They approved it for 21.5, and it became change order number 1, approved. So as a prime, you're going to have a log that has more change orders than a sub, obviously. Understanding the closing out of the project of these items is a big deal. If you don't close out quickly, efficiently, and per contract, they're going to hold up your pay. And they're certainly going to hold up your retention. And that gets to be a very touchy subject with everybody. As I said, the specifications in California Public Works have taken on a whole new level of complexity when you start describing, you take 3 or 4 pages to tell the contractor how you want to close the job out. Well, these all have a purpose. Project closeout items required prior to release of final payment, as-built, parts list, O&M manuals, release of claims, release from agreements, spare parts, cleaning, field records, training, commissioning report, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They define final cleaning, restoration of damaged work, remedial work, spare parts, special tools, extra material, warranties. Thank goodness, one good thing that I do like about coming into the 21st century is the electronics involved. But we used to have to prepare 3-ring binders, heavy duty commercial quality, for the O&M manual. Nowadays you can do it on a PDF document, but it used to be, we used to put for like a $5 or $7 million water treatment upgrade, we would put in $10,000 to prepare the O&M manual, because you need 3 copies, one for yourself, one for the maintenance department at the plant, and one for the engineer's office. Explanation of final inspection. And the last document I have in here is just I put something together a couple of years ago because I had so many of my clients asked, even when I was still running the company, well, what's it take to be, to make it in the California Public Works market? And I said, well, it takes a whole lot of things. Financial preparation, set up company books, apply for a line of credit, apply for insurance, start compiling your records of tax returns and profit financial statements for the bonding company if you want to get bonding. Decide where you're going to look for projects to bid. If you're a sub, prepare your scope letter. By the way, if you're a prime, you don't have to prepare anything as far as a bid proposal because they're all printed up in the specifications, and all we do is fill in the blanks. Estimating your project, the do's and don'ts. After winning the bid, read the contract sent to you by a GC if you're a sub. Mobilization. Monitor all correspondence and paperwork. Don't be the one to hold things up. If you're the prime, you're going to be in a whole lot of trouble if you're late in putting your packages together. If you're the sub, things were not going to work out well for you. Some tips on managing the project, which is a summary of what I've been talking about all afternoon, and the closeout. So those are the examples of the procedures and documents that I talked about in the PowerPoint presentation. I think what I'm trying to impress upon you folks, I know a lot of you are very well experienced. And again, I repeat the comment about the fact that we know that there's software out there that organizes all of these duties for you and all of this correspondence. The key to the whole thing, though, is to do your homework and and manage that process and keep up with it. If you don't keep a firm hand on the submittals process alone, it's gotten so bad that the industry, that most of the contracts we bid on, in the specifications under submittals, it says there, if you have to have all major submittals, major submittals in the first 30 days or 45 days, because it's become an industry habit that many of the suppliers, they take forever to get shop drawings and their submittals in, especially on equipment that's manufactured out of state. And again, because it's California, nobody wants to make anything here. They want to, it's got to be built out of state. Generators and compressors and everything is all manufactured in the Midwest or back east. So you need to, as a project manager, you need to be on top of making sure that you get those submittals in a timely fashion. Electrical contractors are having a heck of a time getting controls submittals from the manufacturers, which are virtually all of them are back east. So it's a discipline problem. It's a management style issue. And managing the project on a public works job it's a full-time job. The bigger the job, the more people it takes to do it. So I hope that gives you an idea of what you would be involved in, what you're in for. And the key to it is discipline and organization. If you do that, you'll stay out of trouble, you'll stay ahead of the game, and hopefully you come out making some money on your project. Any questions?
Ed, I do see a question here. Alfredo's asking, in the subject of CO, do we follow the bylaws of CSLB or Public Works?
You say CO, are you talking about change order?
I assume so, but I'm not sure.
If you're talking about change order, nothing on the bylaws of CSLB has anything to do with that. You have to follow the specifications, as I noted, as I showed you a sample, the excerpt of the specification on change orders. Every public works contract will have, of any size, will have a detailed spec section of how change orders are going to be handled on everything, types, methodology, markups, what constitutes a claim, etc. So you follow the specs.
Great. We don't have any more questions right now. Ed, do you want to reshare your screen?
You want me to go back to it or stop?
Yeah, would you go back and reshare the PowerPoint there? Alfredo says thank you in the Q&A, so thanks Alfredo for asking a question. If anybody else has any questions, please enter them in the Q&A now.
See that?
Yep, you can see it. Yeah, looks good. So was that the conclusion of the main presentation, Ed?
That's it.
Okay, great. So can you just maybe let's advance the slides over to Tiffany's slide. Hi, Tiffany, are you still there? I know it's getting later in the evening. It's getting dark outside.
I'm here.
All right, we would love to hear from you about some of the concretes. We've been talking hypothetically what to do in a contract, and now we're going to talk about some actual contracts that you guys have open.
So here's the thing, I am really the wrong person to talk about specifics on managing contracts. This slide really is just to highlight more contracting opportunities along port property and to really give a visual of where the property that we own, which is the 7.5 miles of waterfront property in San Francisco along the waterfront. And the legend below is numbered, which represent the numbers that are on the map to show you where along the waterfront these properties, these construction projects will take place. Beyond that, you do not want any information from me about how to manage
Well, that's
that.
all I meant was just a list of these actual opportunities here, just to get a taste of what kind of things are available where you can
Absolutely.
Ed's knowledge to work on bidding on these kind of projects.
Absolutely. And what I'll say is that the Port of San Francisco is a department of the city and county of San Francisco. So what you do for Port of San Francisco is what you're going to do for all of city and county. We all share the same process. For those folks who do not own businesses in San Francisco, we will be hopefully releasing our seawall early projects this summer, which is a great opportunity for businesses outside of San Francisco because a lot of that funding is federal. And so it will open up to those who are certified as DBEs, SVBE, and all of the other certifications that are not specific to San Francisco. So I highly recommend that you go to the port website, which I will drop in the chat. I also dropped a specific link to our Seawall Waterfront Resilience Program so that you can stay connected with that. Hey, Alfredo, absolutely. If you are an LBE, you should be connected to the city and to the port. If you're not an LBE and you are in San Francisco, I also have a resource for that, which I'll drop in the chat as well. And that is really it for me.
Great. All right. Thanks, Tiffany. Let's see. And then I believe Tiffany also has a list here of the most active primes that do business with SF Port. Just as a note, everyone's going to be receiving these slides, so you'll be able to take a look at those, and there's some resource links there you can investigate. Who are the primes you might want to connect with? So tomorrow we have an upcoming event. We're doing a webinar with the DCAA, Defense Contracting Auditing Administration, I believe it is, and they're gonna talk about the overview about their organization and the audit process. So if you're doing any defense contracting and you're curious about auditing, please join us tomorrow morning at 10. And then it looks like December 1st, we're going to have a cybersecurity webinar, and there's a lot of developments in cybersecurity and government contracting. So please take a look at that and see if it might be of interest to you. And that's what we have so far. We have plenty of events that are not listed here. You can find all of our upcoming events. We always keep it updated. PTAC, norcalptac.org/calendar. And that's all. Let's see. We're seeing some information dropped in the chat. Let's see if we have any other questions. Tristan's asking, I believe this is to Tiffany, will there be any vertical build outs within the seawall development?
I don't think so. That work is really to lift the seawall. So there won't be any buildings as it relates, unless there's some like sustainability, for structural reasons, but no build outs in what I would think about as it relates to our development project. So nothing like that.
Okay, well, thank you. We can go ahead and end a little early. Tiffany's been kind enough to enter her contact information to the chat, so please copy that down when you have a chance. We are, like I mentioned, this webinar is going to go on our website, so you can take a look for it there as well. You can find the video, and as you exit the webinar, you should be redirected towards a screen that offers you to take just a really quick little satisfaction survey. Let us know what you thought of the webinars. We put in a lot of work, and we want to make sure that that what we do works for you. So please just take a moment if you can. You can fill it out anonymously if you'd like. And just let us know what you thought of today. It makes a big difference for us and for our funders, so that's great. All right, thank everyone, and we'll see you at future webinars.
Thank you guys so much. This was great.
Thanks,
Have a good
Tiffany.
night.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thanks, James.
Bye-bye.